Hi, everybody. So, of course, a couple weeks ago, I announced that I wanted to try and, be more regular about uploading. Didn't happen. So, if anybody was waiting with bated breath for videos from me, I do apologize. I wasn't able to do as much reading the last couple weeks that I wanted to. I can not make excuses. I can say there's no excuse for it. But the fact is, I am still fighting eviction. I had another hearing last week. What an absolute farce. If nothing else, I have learned an awful lot about how to navigate the whole court process with the Ontario Landlord Tenant Board. And I have learned a lot. So, win, maybe? But I'm not evicted yet. So that's a good thing. As far as where it's going to go from here, honestly, I can't talk too much about it, but there's been a couple of offers put back and forth. I don't think that my landlord's going to take the offer that I put out, and I'm certainly not going to take hers because it's purely performative. So, and not to mention a little bit desperate, in my opinion. So we're probably going to end up going back to court, but I have no idea when. And I don't know. I think I have a pretty solid case for just getting her motion dismissed. So who knows what ends up happening, right? I just don't want to live in my car in Ontario in December. So hopefully, at least 6 months from now, I can still be housed. Anyway, I guess that's all I have to say about that. So it is still Falloween, yay! And I'm still, reading entries here and there from the NPR 100 Best Horror Stories. So this week, I chose The Shadow over Innsmouth by H.P. Lovecraft, which is in the public domain, so you can read it for free online if you're so inclined. I picked up a Kindle version of the collected Lovecraft, which I think was if it cost anything, it was less than $2. And that's one of the great things about Kindle is you can get big collections like this for very, very cheap if you want to go through into the classics and you don't want to try and hunt them down online. Now, I don't like Lovecraft. I never have. Because every Lovecraft story that I've read so far, now, granted, I have not read a lot of them, but it's a guy goes to a place which is moody and scary. He walks into a place and the place gets darker and seedier as he goes. And here comes the racism. And then he sees something that scares the living shit out of him. And then he passes out. And then when he wakes up, he can't tell if it was, if it actually happened or if it was a dream or is he crazy or what. So, here comes the gaslighting. And that's basically it. So, I don't know. I appreciate Lovecraft's influence on horror. And certainly there have been a lot of mythos inspired stories that have been very enjoyable. But I just have never liked Lovecraft. I don't like the purple prose. I don't like the sameness of everything. I really just... The Horror at Red Hook was the first story of his I read, and I was just like... And then I read Polaris, and I was just like, fuck off, Lovecraft. Like, what the... Oh. So anyway, so I went into this mostly in the spirit of, I guess, completion, trying to catch up with stuff that I just hadn't read before. And I didn't like it through most of it, And I actually had the audiobook playing, or a YouTube reading of it. That's one of the great things about YouTube is often you get people making videos reading these old classic stories. So I had it playing as I was reading along because that sometimes helps my attention span, especially if it's something that I'm not enjoying very much. And I found myself kind of going, come on, how much more is there of this? And that was like halfway through, right? So it was 3 times longer than it needed to be. So that was the first issue I had with it. So the plot, and I'm going to give you spoilers for a 100-year-old story, but it was published in 1931, and I believe it was the only, from what I've read, it was the only long story that Lovecraft published in his lifetime. It was a novella. It's not quite a novel. And the story is about this guy. He's a student, and he hears about this rundown town called Innsmouth, and he goes to check out the architecture. He thinks it'll be a good place to go. And the first person that he encounters that's heard of Innsmouth tells him that, it's this place where, it's kind of run down and the people are weird, and there was this guy named Obed Marsh who maybe made some kind of deal. We don't know, but, it's not a great place. So he gets on the bus and he has a conversation with the rail engineer, and he gets on the bus and he gets to Innsmouth, and he goes and finds the town drunk. And then the town drunk gives him more information about the same thing. And each time they tell him that, the people are kind of weird looking, and they get weirder looking, like they're okay looking when they're younger, but then they get kind of much weirder as they get older. And he starts to look around and realize that, everybody looks kind of strange. And the first kind of hint of the much discussed Lovecraft racism is, when the first person he talks to says that, Marsh married a girl from the islands, and then he starts talking about these, what sounds like people of color, but it's kind of described in a weird sort of way. So then this guy is like, okay, that's a little strange. And he's like, yeah, it's the racism, and we think that's why people don't like these people. What? So I think, I didn't do any reading up on that part of it, but maybe Lovecraft, he was known for being racist even for his time. So maybe he was sort of acknowledging what people were saying about his own work. I don't know. Anyway, there's a weird comment in there. So anyway, so this guy starts walking through the town, and then he comes across the town drunk. And the town drunk tells him that, he gives him a lot more of the back history. And this is where it starts to get interesting. And so it turns out that the guy who founded the main company in town, this Obed Marsh guy, he made some kind of deal with the people from the sea, and, they started feeding them their kids in return for prosperity. And this guy got rich, but beyond anybody's wildest dreams, and they started breeding with the deep ones, and this is why everybody looks so weird. So with this knowledge, the guy kind of goes out in a boat and sort of disappears, and nobody knows what happened to him. So the protagonist is really starting to freak out at this point, and he's looking around, and everybody's looking more menacing. So he goes back to the hotel, and he shuts himself in his room for the night, and he starts to hear, his doorknob turn, and he's like, okay, it must be a mistake. And then he starts to hear, and he's like, nope. He just nopes the fuck out of there. He goes out and he starts to, escape down the stairs, and there's like a big long chase, and all the people from town start to chase him, and he takes refuge and he hides in a field until they pass, and he manages to, barely escape with his life from all of these horrifying creatures, because now that it's nighttime, all of the scariest, ugliest people can come out, right? Because I guess they hide them in closets during the day or something. So he goes back home, and he starts to put the pieces together and about, why the town's deserted and why this deal happened and nobody liked it. And so then he starts to look at his family tree. Oh, and it turns out that his great-great-something-great-grandmother was Marsh, was part of the original Obed Marsh deal. Somebody committed suicide. Somebody couldn't handle it. And he starts to find out these family secrets. And in the end, he decides that, he figures out that his great-great-great-whatever grandmother didn't actually die, so she's one of these people, and he decides to go and join the Deep Ones. And that's where it ends. And he, kind of was happy, and he was unhappy and scared and blah all the way through, and then finally, things get a lot more interesting. Now, I liked the ending. It just, why did we have to get the setup and then get told again and then get shown the proof, right? I mean, why do we have to go through it 3 times? I think that was what bothered me about the structure of the story. I mean, it's one thing to, I don't know, a lot of stories from, before 1940 or so that were published in magazines like Weird Tales, they're considered the pulps, and they were paid a penny a word. And of course, the more words, the more they got paid, right? So I'm going to give it 4 out of 5 for the ending. I enjoyed the ending when he, it turns out he is one and he goes back to them. And I was kind of looking through TV tropes just to kind of get more of a sense of the deeper analysis of the story. And I guess, and again, we'll discuss, we can discuss the racism or whatever. And some people read it as sort of what's horrifying about interracial marriage and, people from different races coming together and having kids. But if that was Lovecraft's intent, then his hero would not have gone back to the deep. And it's really, it's really more a dark fantasy in Lovecraft's particular style about mer people and, what happens when we mix with them, kind of thing. So it's probably not as bad as some other ones. I mean, like the horror at Red Hook was just an awful story to even get through. It was like, oh man, probably not a good place to start. But I guess if you like Lovecraft and you want to find out what all the fuss is about, this is probably a good place to start, because what Lovecraft does well is atmosphere, and that I have always liked the idea that there are kind of monsters and things at the edges of our world that we don't understand and that we don't see, and to see it would drive us mad. And this is another example of that. So that's The Shadow over Innsmouth. Hope you're reading lots of horror. Hope you're enjoying FALLOWEEN and the lead up to the greatest day of the year. Have a great day.